Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Arab American Chamber of Commerce podcast. My name is Maui Sanadiki, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce, and I have Elias.
Yeah, excited to be here, folks. And we've got Michael Shamoon here with the chamber.
Michael Shamoon is also a board member on the American Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Michael. Michael is an attorney, an immigration attorney, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing, Michael? How's everything?
Thank you for having me.
How are you enjoying the weather?
Well, we can't complain. It's 115 degrees out.
Right.
Yeah.
No complaints allowed.
I mean, on the positive side, it's only like 3 months
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
and like 9 good months, let's say.
Yeah.
Like we get some cold weeks, but they're not too bad. So in general, Nevada is a nice place to
Yeah.
live.
Oh, absolutely.
We get enough good weather throughout the year to forget how bad these 3 months
Yeah,
are.
I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
And not forget the pools. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you gotta
Yeah.
find a pool.
Yeah. And anyway, California is like four hours away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You'll be on the beach. So
Right.
no complaints there. Hopefully they get the train very quick done so we can use the train, and hopefully it's not what they said that it's gonna be, I don't know, $300 to go
Whew.
over this. Yeah.
Wow.
That's insane. That better be VIP.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that this was like fake news or something. But enough with that. Michael, tell us about you. Tell us about your journey. Let's start with how did you come here, or what brought you to here,
Okay.
and how did you choose to become a lawyer?
So I immigrated to this country in 2001, actually. It was just a few months after 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
And I was 7 years old. So coming here, it was a very, very big shock to me, especially with all the things going on politically, internationally, and the kind of rampant discrimination against Arabs worldwide
Right.
because of 9/11.
Mhm.
That was kind of my welcome wagon to the U.S. essentially. Like I just come here, I'm a little kid, brand new to the country, barely speak any English, and I met with this like almost hatred by people that don't even know me, just based on what they've been hearing, and it just goes to show you how much influence the messaging in the media has over people's opinions about issues that they're not informed in, but that they think they're informed in.
Mhm.
And so it took a lot of adjusting for me, I think, as a kid growing up in school, especially here in Vegas, because the Arab community was not that present, 20 years ago. It was still growing. And so we didn't really have something to come back to when we were faced with all these
No, like,
external,
safe place.
yes, no safe place.
It was as if folks were hiding because
Yes.
of all of the
Mhm,
racism. A lot of people didn't want to express that they
Yeah.
were Arab.
Yeah, and so like one thing I've noticed about our Arab community in Vegas, especially people that have been here a longer time, is we tend to like be more reserved about our Arabness. Like it's not as out in the open. Say like if you're in Chicago, LA, Detroit,
Right.
it's different, because there's enough speak. The immigrant children, usually by the second and third generations, they barely speak Arabic, and I think part of that is because of the pressure from the external community here, because there's not a large Arab presence. There's more of a pressure to not just integrate or assimilate, but to kind of hide and not make yourself known as an Arab. And so that's something I struggled with throughout pretty much all of school. I went to public school, CCSD, from the second grade all the way till the end of high school.
Yeah.
And I never felt comfortable sharing my identity with other people. I kept it to myself. I didn't really tell anyone I was Arab, and I guess I'm white passing enough. I have lighter features. Most people just didn't know I was Arab. Of course, doesn't count my very first class when I was introduced as, the new kid from Iraq, right?
Oh, man.
There was no way to avoid that one. But after some time had passed, you go to a new school, new faces, people don't know who you are. I just kept it to myself. I just didn't feel comfortable sharing that. And I didn't really feel comfortable with people knowing my identity until college. So it really did take a while for me. And I think part of that is, yes. And it's not that I was ashamed of my identity. I've always been proud of my heritage. It's just that I didn't want to deal with all the backlash that came with people knowing. Like, you get treated differently. And it's something I definitely experienced a lot of in the very beginning, especially because I came right around when 9/11 happened and there was this mass hysteria. And
just when things start cooling down, Iraq invasion happened.
Right.
And I don't think this was
Right. Yeah, this didn't help at all.
Yeah.
And with Islamophobia being on the rise back then, even if you're not Muslim, like I'm not Muslim, but just being Arab alone,
Just
you
the
were
looks.
you would be.
People not even from Arab descent had some issues with that, had some
Mhm.
problems because they're like from the eastern side of the world, and they look like us, and they
Oh
got,
yeah, it was rampant, and I think Raja in our
Mhm.
last episode he talked about fear, right? That was people's fear that kind of led to
Yes.
those negative energies, and it doesn't help that we hid as a community because we weren't able to build bridges. But even at that point, it was so much animosity. I mean, you
Right.
had the FBI and police literally knocking on Arabs' doors just
Yeah.
because they were Arabs.
The
post
FBI
9/11.
knocked on our door.
Yeah,
You
they
know,
did
that
knock
happened.
My family too.
Yeah.
It's
They did, huh?
insane. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I remember they stayed for like 8, 12 hours. All of us were like hidden in
Yeah.
a room.
I think they came to my house twice.
Wow.
And I've noticed that, like, especially in the immigration field, and this was one of the reasons I went into immigration law when I became a lawyer, was that Arabs get treated differently by our immigration laws and our immigration agencies. We always hear about the Latino issues
Right.
in immigration, and of course, that there's a whole mess of things there that need reform. But if you compare the way most immigrants are treated to the way Arab immigrants are treated, you will notice a stark difference.
regardless of their religion.
Regardless of their religion, it's really just the country of origin.
Oh.
And what tends to happen is much longer waiting times for the same exact benefits
Oh,
that they're
really?
applying for. So, like,
Wow.
you could be applying for anything, whether it's a green card or you're naturalizing to become a U.S. citizen. Just having a name that's Arab or being from a country that's Arab, your application will take longer to process, and sometimes much longer. I could share like a personal anecdote. I remember when I was a kid, my mom was applying for naturalization to become a U.S. citizen after we had been here long enough for her to be eligible.
That's great.
And she went through the process. She had her interview where you have to do like a civics test and demonstrate
Right,
that you
right.
have sufficient English language skills. And she passed all of that, but she didn't get her oath ceremony, which is like when you actually become a citizen, until about 3 years after she passed her interview.
What
3
year was
years. I believe this was in 2006.
that? Wow.
Yeah.
3 years.
3 years she waited until she got her oath ceremony.
Did
Um,
you give any reason for that?
I was really too young to remember what was going on, but all I know is that she had an Arabic name, and they're notorious for holding these applications in like limbo, claiming that it's for national security reasons and that the FBI needs to clear this individual before they can approve their application. It's just, 3 years is a little ridiculous. Does
Yeah,
it really
that's
take
right.
3 years to clear someone's identity? Or is this really like a backhanded way of just punishing people for their identity? It's like, just because you're Arab, we're going to make you go through this extra hurdle. You're going to have to wait longer than everyone else just for having been born where you were born and having the name that you have, which is insane.
If I may, Michael, my family went through something similar. Our asylum case was pending for 19 years.
Wow.
I grew up in that entire time span, and I won't share any more on today's podcast about that, but I never really thought about how that was related to having an Arab identity and Moroccan last name. But yeah, those dots really connect. And what can be done about that? I've witnessed firsthand and also anecdotal, from other people, experiences with officers part of the immigration system seeming to make it more difficult or misleading.
Yes.
But why is that okay, allowed? What can be done to help curb that level of systemic racism?
Well, unfortunately, when we're dealing with government agencies, the amount of things that they're able to do without much oversight from elected officials is shockingly big, right? You would think in a country where we have democracy and we have a representative system of government, we vote for our representatives in Congress, our senators, our local government, but government agencies are a completely different beast. No one there is elected. They're all appointed, and they're really the ones that have the decision-making power in the day-to-day of running the affairs of this country. So Congress will pass a law that says how you can qualify to immigrate to the United States or how you can qualify for asylum, but there are a lot of gaps in those laws, and those gaps get filled by our government agencies, like the Department of Homeland Security. And so the way they choose to fill those gaps and interpret those laws, they have a lot of discretion, and they can get away sometimes with doing ridiculous things. Now, thankfully, recently, just last month, actually, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision where they essentially overturned a concept known as Chevron deference.
Right.
And this Chevron deference is basically a legal doctrine that comes from a case. It was Chevron, the big gas company, right? And they were involved in a case where the Supreme Court held that government agencies have broad discretion when they are making decisions or when they're taking an action. And this doesn't really matter what area of the government we're talking about. This applies really broadly to all government agencies. So the Chevron case had nothing to do with immigration,
Right.
but because of that precedent, it applied to immigration decisions as well.
Oh, okay.
And so oftentimes what happens is when a government agency makes a bad decision in your case and you want to appeal to actually be heard by a district court, the court's hands are tied. They might disagree with the decision of the agency. They might think that they handled your case wrong and that they came out with the wrong decision, but they have to approve it. If there's any way they can conceive of that decision can stand, they're required by this legal precedent to uphold the decision, essentially.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So basically, the government agencies have the right to interpret and look at the case and say this is what the law means.
Yes. Yes.
What's so interesting?
And that's now is overturned.
That was overturned. Yes.
Oh, that was
so
overturned.
this
That wasn't
we should
happened.
start
Yeah,
to
that's cool.
see a difference.
Okay.
Hopefully.
I didn't think about it because for the past few weeks, everything whenever this overturn incident is discussed, they talk about other things like, let's say, government says you should not government. Sorry, the law says pollution is bad, right?
Right.
That's example. The government have to decide what does that mean.
Exactly.
Like that percentage.
Yeah. Which is why we have the Environmental Protection Agency, and
Yeah.
and their job is to take the laws that Congress passes
Mhm.
and create the very specific regulations.
So now
That-
they can't.
Well, no, they still can. They still, these government agencies still have the power to pass regulations and interpret the laws that Congress passes. The only difference now is when someone wants to challenge a decision made by one of these agencies, and they go to court to have their case heard. This would be like in the federal district court, right, or the circuit court. Sorry, Circuit Court of Appeals. Yeah. Now, instead of the judges being forced to apply the Chevron deference precedent and basically find any way they can to allow that agency decision to stand, they can look at that decision on the merits and decide whether or not that agency actually made the right decision. Right? So they no longer have to defer to the agencies, which means courts now have more scrutiny at hand. They're able to look at the decision on a case-by-case basis and really look at the merits of that decision and make a decision. Their hands are no longer tied. And so we should hopefully start to see in a lot of these cases going on appeal, judges being more aggressive towards the agency. This doesn't apply, however, retroactively. So previous cases on appeal that lost because of Chevron deferences are going to stand. It's just going forward. Yeah.
How does that, tying that back to the immigration situation and as it applies to really long waiting times or certain actions like even deportations or not enforcing deportations, like how does this new court case apply to that? And is there any have you seen anything where folks have been able to attempt to hold the immigration system accountable, for long delays or for any other unjust actions?
So long delays, it depends on the type of statute for the specific benefit you're applying for. So, like, for example, I mentioned my mom's citizenship case where she had to wait 3 years. There's actually a mechanism by which you can sue USCIS for something like that, for citizenship, for example, for a long delay, because by statute they actually have 120 days to render a decision on your case after you've been interviewed, right? So there are certain cases, certain types of applications where there is a statutory period of days that's prescribed. So they have to follow that. And if they don't, you do have a legal remedy. We call it a writ of mandamus. And basically you go to the court and tell the court, I filed this application, I had my interview, and now it's been 3 years, and they were supposed to make a decision within 120 days. So then the court at that point, very looking at the facts of the case, is going to ask USCIS, that's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, what happened? Like, why haven't you made a decision on the case? And oftentimes USCIS just has to act, right? That doesn't mean they have to approve you. They could still deny you, but they can't just keep holding your case without a decision.
Is it more likely that they'll deny you for taking that type of legal action?
Some people think that if they go after USCIS aggressively, like if they sue them in court, USCIS is going to try to deny them for whatever reason, right? But if there is no reason they could deny you, they can't deny you. They can't just arbitrarily deny you. Yes, because then you can appeal that and win, right? If they actually are denying you in violation of the law. Like, if you're eligible for the benefit, they're supposed to grant it. Sometimes in a writ of mandamus case, the judge actually has the power to grant the case and completely bypass USCIS. I've seen that happen sometimes. But yeah, that's just like one example. But the big difference is going to be like on the individual cases and setting precedents going forward. So like, let's say someone's case got denied because our immigration system decided to interpret an act of Congress a certain way. If you go to court and win, you could now set a precedent, and now they can never use that reason again to deny anybody else, right? So it's like one thing at a time, one little issue at a time, and it's incremental change, really. We're not going to get big change unless there's like massive reform of the immigration system. I mean, personally, I think they should toss the whole thing out and start over. But that's really, that's not going to happen in this political climate. Yeah.
I don't think they apply anymore.
Yeah.
But talking about suing the USCIS, actually, I have a friend who sued for his case, and then he got it. He sued for his wife, and he got it. And he sued for his parents, and he got it.
That's incredible.
So yeah,
I want to talk to your friend.
Yeah. I mean, through his lawyer, his lawyer
Right.
let's sue them. Every time like, oh, they're late, let's sue them. Actually,
Oh,
it's
that's
better.
great.
Mhm.
They wait for it. His lawyer, I don't know if he uses it for everyone or for his case, I don't know. But every time they go past the 120 days or the
Mhm.
time they set, they immediately sue
Right.
and they win. As you said, and this is something I think, going back to what you said,
Mhm.
we in hiding, their community being under all the pressure for the past 20 years or more, we avoid dealing with government.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
totally.
We tend to be non-confrontational, where we almost take this stance that whatever mistreatment we're getting from the government is deserved somehow, right? Like because we very rarely make noise about these things.
that's true. Yeah.
But again, that suing USCIS for a lot of people is a luxury, right? Like your friend was able to sue for his family and win, but not everybody can do that. Not everybody can afford a lawyer that's going to keep filing these federal lawsuits. Some people just take whatever they get, and if the government makes a bad decision in their case, they just take it. They don't do anything about it, and sometimes they're not even able to because they can't afford to pay a lawyer to do all these things, unfortunately.
It costs a lot of time and work.
Yeah.
Going back to being a lawyer,
Mhm.
what made you take that decision? Is it family? Is it like Arab? You have to be either doctor or lawyer.
Well,
it's like okay, lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the part of that was the family obligation. Of course, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. You just pick one. You can't be anything but those two things. So personally, I couldn't imagine myself being a doctor, just because I don't like being in big crowded places with a bunch of sick people, and it's just not my style. But I do like helping people.
Right.
And so I thought, well, if I become a lawyer, because that's my only other option, I want to be the type of lawyer that helps people instead of, exploit people and work for corporations, and the kind of like the image of a lawyer that you see portrayed sometimes being just out to, go after the little guy and just make money, right? I wanted to be the kind of lawyer that is actually improving the quality of life for the little guy, one case at a time. And immigration was just an area of the law that was very personal to me, of course. And that's why I chose to do immigration law.
And you went to UNLV?
Yeah, I went to the William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV, and I did my undergrad at UNLV as well. So
What was that experience like for you, both UNLV undergrad and also law? You mentioned earlier that you felt a lot of the exclusion for the Arab culture up until college. What changed?
I think the political climate changed. I think
To the better?
I think so. I think people probably started to become more educated about issues. I think people started to distrust the media more, which social media, the internet, people started hearing more viewpoints. And I think we also grew up, us Middle Eastern children became adults. And so we started educating people, right? We started speaking up for ourselves. And I think that did make a difference. And it helped a lot of people come out of hiding and be, express themselves and be open about their identities. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the passage of time and people hearing more viewpoints, getting their news from sources other than the mainstream media, and just meeting other people that just change their minds. Like when you go 20 years never having met an Arab person, but having all these preconceptions about Arabs,
Correct, yeah.
and then finally you meet someone who's Arab, or you find out someone that you've known for a long time was Arab the whole time, and you just didn't know.
And you liked him the whole time.
Yeah, and you're like, wow, I had no idea you were Arab. Yeah. So you don't ride camels, and like. But yeah, a lot of times there is ignorance, and some of it is funny. We can laugh at it, but some of it is actually very harmful.
Right.
And so it's good that things have changed for the better. And I think especially with what's happening now since October, I think the global reaction has been very different to the global reaction to September 11th. I think that we did see a rise in Islamophobia. However, I think we've seen much more of a show of solidarity with Arabs, with all the protests going on all over the world. I don't think we saw that during September 11th. I don't think we saw that with the invasion of Iraq. It was not.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
That's something I always say, like, this subject we can talk about forever, but regardless of how hard is what's going on right now, when it happened, and it was bad when it happened, they compared it immediately to 9/11, right?
Yes.
And we knew, and you just mentioned what happened after, and how Arab were portrayed, how they had to hide. That's not the case anymore,
right.
Which means that just paintbrushing everyone, like that, like they are all the same, they're all like this, they're all bad, doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Whatever the media, as you said, distrusting the media, sometimes it has some bad negative effects, but the good effects, like people are more, like a lot of people are more informed, and the people who are, like, when they're more informed, they can have different stance, and that could help us on the long run. I think that's a good point you mentioned.
Yeah, and social media has helped with that. We can share.
But mentioning that, this is actually a very good point, because a lot of people are, especially the non-citizen, right? People with green card, with immigration cases, they're afraid to say anything, to act anything, to look certain way, even because of what's going on, right?
Right.
We unfortunately we moved to this country with all the freedoms in this country. We still have the fear that we bring, we have to be quiet. You have to say nothing. What do you say about that? Would this affect, like, somebody if they speak up about what's going on, right? Would this affect their case?
Well, I mean, freedom of speech is a right that's enshrined in the Bill of Rights to our Constitution, right? It's the First Amendment. And those rights, the court decided a long time ago, are rights of every person who is subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. Constitution. So by simply being physically in the United States, you have that right? Like freedom of speech. That can't be taken away from you. It's different from, like, the right to vote, right? The right to vote is something that only citizens have.
Correct. Yeah.
But basic civil liberties, those are rights that all individuals hold just by simply being here in the U.S. Now, of course, there is this feeling that, there's this fear. If you're undocumented, you don't want contact with the government. You want to hide. You don't want to interact with the government out of fear that any kind of action that puts you on their radar is going to result in you being deported from the country. And of course, that fear is understandable for someone who doesn't feel security in this country. Like, this could be a person who has spent almost their entire life living here, but just because they don't have that green card or they're not citizens, they think that any one thing can get them deported. Now that isn't actually the case, especially under the current administration's enforcement priorities. People who have been in this country since before November 1st of 2020, that was just the date that the government decided on, are not considered an enforcement priority for deportation unless they've committed a crime that makes them either a threat to public safety or a national security threat, like if they've been convicted of a terrorist act or something like that. So most people who have been here since before 2020 are not currently on the enforcement priority, which means ICE and DHS in general is not going to go after them and try to deport them.
But they can.
But they still can. They still can. But under the enforcement priorities that were established in a policy memorandum by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, they have stated very clearly that they will not go after these things. So even though they have the legal ability to do it, they won't do it because it violates their enforcement priorities, and they do have to abide by those internal memoranda that are issued. However, those memoranda, of course, come and go depending on who the Secretary of Homeland Security is, and that's based on who the current administration appoints, right? And who the next administration will appoint. And then these policies, when they come out, they're of course met with criticism from both sides, whichever side issues it, right? So sometimes that results in litigation that forces the courts to put a stay on these policies, meaning that they can't be implemented until the court has made a decision based on the legal challenge that's being brought against the policy in question. And so like with the policy memorandum I was just talking about, that was held up in litigation for a while. And so it didn't really go back into effect until I believe just 2023, even though the policy memo itself came very early on in the Biden administration. So these policies, they come out all the time, and sometimes people think they can benefit from them, and they make us hopeful, but a lot of times they don't really amount to anything in practical life, just because of so for example, I wanted to talk about the new policy that just was announced a few weeks ago about parole in place for spouses of U.S. citizens.
Right.
And so that's a new policy that DHS just announced. And if implemented, it could potentially allow a large number of people currently living in the U.S. with no status whatsoever the ability to apply for a residency and get green cards, and then eventually become U.S. citizens. So we're very cautiously optimistic about this policy because it hasn't actually gone into effect yet. They're saying sometime in August, but we don't really know. Okay. And of course, whichever administration comes in January, they can get rid of it. It'll be really up to that administration. And really, this administration could have passed this policy, back in 2021 when Biden took office, right? But they waited until the last few months of his presidency, of his first term, to do that. And it just, I think that sends a message to the people. I think it tells people that they weren't really a priority. This wasn't a priority to them. This is something they did at the last minute in the hopes that they can get some more votes, right? It just feels disingenuous when these people have been in the U.S. and they've been struggling all this time, and they really should be given residency because they've been here so long and they're married to U.S. citizens. I mean, I really can't think of a reason why they shouldn't be
in any other case, they're citizens by now. Just for as you said, maybe a mistake not even done by them. Like,
Yeah.
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 I mean, sometimes it's even just mishandled by the administration itself, like the USCIS
or not being
or
clear, and a lot of misinformation in communities.
Yeah.
Sometimes he thinks like, okay, I'll come here and marry
Right.
a U.S. citizen and I'm
But-
fine, but
Mhm.
there's still things need to be done.
that entire premise, though,
Mhm.
in the first place, part of going back to you jokingly saying, let's throw out the entire rule book and start from scratch. I mean, to say that, one person's, liberty and life in America is based upon another person, and their relationship to that person, I think that in itself
Yeah.
is flawed.
Well, that's our entire immigration system.
So what do you suggest? Do you have like what do you think about the point
Oh, yeah.
system?
Like, well, if you had a magic wand, right, that you could help redo a lot of it. It's
Right.
What would that look like from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that the immigration policies of the United States have roots in a lot of racism, frankly. A lot of the immigration policies we have come from the framework of exclusion and not the framework of inclusion. So when you think about the laws about who can immigrate to the United States, they're not really written that way. They're written more as like, who are we going to keep out?
Right.
And so immigration laws in this country from the very start, from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when they first started coming together into like a body of laws, and then it was built upon throughout subsequent acts. It was really all about how can we keep people we don't want out of this country. It wasn't about like how can we make it possible for people to come into this country. It was already from the standpoint of too many people are coming in. We need to find a way to keep them out, or at least keep out the ones we don't like. And that was very often based on race,
Right.
Especially excluding Asians in particular.
Yeah.
This is why we sued to become white, right?
Yes, exactly. And I gave a CLE on that in April at the law school, where we discussed some of the cases that were brought to the courts by Arabs who were petitioning the courts to declare them white so that they wouldn't be subject to these racist policies that prevented them from becoming citizens. Of course, unfortunately, that backfired, because by the time the courts came to the consensus that yes, Arabs are white, the whole restriction on non-whites being able to naturalize had been lifted. So they went through kind of all of that for nothing, really, because by the time the courts said yes, Arabs are white, Arabs could already naturalize, and all they got for it was now you have to check white on every form and you're considered white. And that, of course, is problematic for other reasons, because Arabs are not, there's no way to gauge the type of discrimination that Arabs face, because if they're white on paper, how can they really be undergoing racial discrimination, right? Because we have this idea that if you're white, you're a part of the majority, you can't be discriminated against by definition. You have to be a minority to be discriminated against.
This is actually a point I would like you to talk more about, because I engage in a lot of discussions, and a lot of Arabs want to stay white. Say like, oh, if they know we are Arabs, they're gonna discriminate against us. And tell them, well, since they don't, if they want to discriminate, they know that you're not white anyway. You know, by there's many ways to know. And they're gonna discriminate, and nobody can say anything, because there's no official survey or anything official says that, well, out of, I don't know, 100,000, 10 million Arabs, those cases of discrimination happen because we're not Arabs. Can you talk?
And I mean, the reality is we don't even know how many Arabs there are in this country. All we have are estimates. And the reason is because, like you mentioned, there are, first of all, the Arabs who will never say they're Arab anywhere. They'll always check the box white, even when they have the option of checking another box. Then you have the lack of collection of demographic data, because most forms you fill out aren't going to have an option for Arab or Middle Eastern. They're just going to have white. So we're both under collecting the data, and Arabs themselves are underreporting about their identities, right? So you have both of these problems. And so we don't know how many Arabs there are in this country. And when we don't know how many Arabs there are, it makes it very hard to quantify discrimination on a national level. But of course, what I would say to all those Arabs who um, believe that as long as they can be white on paper, they're going to be free from discrimination. I think it's just a very, very pie in the sky idea, right? Like the reality is, when someone looks at you, they can tell you're not white.
Right.
Or if they see your name written down,
Right.
oftentimes you're going to have a name that gives away your identity, right? Especially if you're Muslim and you have a Muslim name or a Muslim last name. It's going to be very hard to hide.
Last name.
Yeah.
One example that might hit home for some people would be, going back to when you came to this country as a 7-year-old and you spoke a little bit of English, but not enough. We know that there's this amount of kids that speak Spanish, for example, and we can help supplement that,
Right.
By creating English as a second language for Spanish kids, or, having more, Spanish teachers involved in the education.
Right.
We don't have any of that data for Arabs.
Right.
And so imagine you growing up without that support system. It just didn't exist, and there's no data to say why it even should exist. And I'm not, that's one example that comes to mind. Probably many other in a pathway to report.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all those points.
I want to go back, Michael, to your career, if we could.
Mm-hmm, sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about you starting your law firm and
Mm-hmm.
What that journey was like, and where you're at with it now, and how you've come to be a part of the Arab Chamber?
Yeah, so it was always my plan, even when I was in law school, to start my own law firm, because I didn't want to go work for a big firm. I wanted to build something from nothing and have that be my own. So when I graduated from law school, I had the opportunity to complete a fellowship at the Thomas and Mack Legal Clinic, which is part of the law school at UNLV, specifically under the immigration clinic. And so I did a fellowship there for 2 years, where I spearheaded a program called the University Legal Services Program. And we provided free legal assistance and representation to students, their families, and employees of the university as well, and their families in immigration. So that ranged from like the simplest things, like applying for citizenship for somebody, or getting a green card for a student who just married another student who was a U.S. citizen, all the way to like doing deportation defense and showing up in court for a detained family member of a student in immigration custody, and fighting to prevent them from being deported.
That's great.
Yeah, and so I did that for 2 years, and I learned a lot about a lot of different areas of immigration, because I did get to do a little bit of everything while I was there. And so when I left that fellowship in 2021, I then went into private practice, and I started my law firm, Shamoon Elias LLP, with my business partner, who we graduated law school together, and we had always discussed, the possibility of opening a law firm together, because we have a good working dynamic with each other. And so we started the law firm, and here we are 3 years later, and it's been growing. And I'm very thankful for having had the opportunity to do this, and not being forced to go into the legal profession like most other people do, being an associate at a large firm and not really enjoying what you're doing. I'm very fortunate that I was able to go directly into private practice, and I find it very rewarding.
That's amazing.
So with that said,
Mm-hmm.
can you share a story where, like, you, at the end of it, when it's all done, you were like, I'm glad I did this. I'm so happy that this worked and I was able to help, this person, this family.
Yeah. So So there's one case that comes to mind that is very, very meaningful to me, and it was actually the very first immigration case I worked on. This was before I was even a lawyer. It was the summer between my second and third years of law school, and I had just found out that I was going to be doing my last year of law school as a student attorney in the immigration clinic. But I hadn't actually started that yet. So I had like zero immigration experience other than being an immigrant myself.
Right.
But
That's a big experience.
yeah, it is. It really is. But there was this family from Iraq, a Christian family, that had been terribly persecuted by ISIS, and I mean like this family was like destroyed by ISIS. Like it was really bad. So they did terrible things. And they had come to the US seeking asylum, and they applied, and of course this was like back in 2014 when ISIS was on the rise.
Right.
But what I'm talking about, this was 2018, because they had just gotten denied. They basically were denied asylum.
So they wait 4 years and they got
Yeah,
denied.
they got
Okay.
denied. And that was when an email came into the law school from a local immigration attorney here, asking if there was anyone at the law school willing to volunteer that could speak Arabic. They were just looking for somebody to translate,
Okay.
simply because this lawyer had taken on this case pro bono, meaning for free.
Okay.
And they did not have the resources to actually represent this family. They didn't have any Arabic speakers on staff, right? Like they didn't have the ability to do what this family needed. But this lawyer, she really wanted to take this case because she felt, she was heartbroken for this family, and she was touched. She wanted to take their case, knowing that she didn't have anybody speaking Arabic, in the hopes that she could find somebody quickly. And so that's that's where I came in, because I was emailed by my professor, who said, this could be a good opportunity for you before you start as a student attorney to get this experience doing something immigration related. And so of course I was happy to do it. I didn't know much about the case itself, other than they needed somebody to speak Arabic.
Okay.
So I was really just going in to interpret. And so I showed up, and they briefed me about the case, and I found out that it was an Iraqi family, Christian family, just like me. So already now I felt even closer to the situation,
Right.
because it's like, this is not just somebody who speaks Arabic. This is someone from like my same background, right? Like my same ethnic group and everything. And when I heard the story of what had happened to them, I was shocked that this is how our immigration system treated asylum seekers, because this is a family that had clear evidence of the atrocities that they suffered in Iraq, and they came here seeking refuge, and our country just denied them and said, well, ISIS is no longer a problem in Iraq. Our latest
This was the reason?
This was basically the reason. They said ISIS is no longer a problem, which is not true. That was not true at all, right? It was just that at the time, the Trump administration wanted to say that they had defeated ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And so part of pushing that claim that ISIS was defeated was they had to also tell people who were fleeing from ISIS, it's like, no, you can go back. It's safe. ISIS is gone.
Yeah.
Right?
So terrible.
Yeah, just really terrible.
And ISIS is the atrocities, for people who probably aren't really familiar, it could probably be very similar to what you see in the cartel, right? And what the cartel has done to people's families in public, executions, stuff like that. I mean, ISIS is guilty of all of those things. And so it was
of
not,
course,
just being afraid for no reason.
No,
it was your
no,
family members were being
it wasn't just a fear. It was like an actual, because like in asylum law, you have two ways you can qualify for asylum. One is you fear returning to your country because you think there's a chance you're going to be persecuted if you go back.
Yeah.
The other one is you fear returning to your country because you actually were persecuted in the past. So if you were persecuted in the past, there's a presumption that there's a chance you're going to be persecuted if you go back.
But that was the case for this.
Yeah, they had clearly undergone like persecution. I mean, one of the members of this family was publicly executed.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was terrible.
I can't believe they denied.
And they were denied. And so this was like,
I thought first we were gonna say like taking forever and
Yeah.
you had
Yeah.
something-
Submit the writ.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Problem solved.
yeah, it was
Especially
bad.
that time, as you said, but this is what happens with politics
Mhm.
going into everything. You know, it ruins everything.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So
And being more and more polarized, everything.
Right.
You
mhm,
know, like just now you mentioned the Chevron
deference.
reference. Yes, you know, was done by was overturned by the Supreme Court, which is mainly nowadays from one side of
Mhm.
the political aisle.
Yeah.
So automatically it was deemed as like a bad thing from the other side, although it could have, so as you mentioned,
Mhm.
it could have some really good things that comes out from it, because now, as you said, you can challenge the government, not because the government said so.
Right.
You have to abide.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying don't abide. I mean, like you can go and challenge it. No, this is not what meant.
It's not
Right.
fair.
Not
Right.
fair. Yeah.
The government can make mistakes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the checks and balances in this country.
Right.
We have checks and balances because we know that governments
Yeah.
can make mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you do to
Um,
defend this family?
So I started out just interpreting for this lawyer, and then she saw how involved I was and how much I had to offer in this case. And so she asked me if I wanted to be co-counsel on this case. And of course, I agreed. By then I had already graduated law school and I was a practicing lawyer. And
So the timeline for managing this case went from you starting off, that was your first case, and it was still not anywhere near complete by the time you were a
yes,
lawyer.
exactly. So this case actually didn't end until 2023.
Oh wow.
And part of that delay was because of COVID, because this family kept waiting for a court date and their court date kept getting pushed back.
Okay.
So we were originally supposed to have this final hearing in 2020, when I already was a lawyer by
Right,
2020,
yeah.
but it could have ended much sooner for this family, but they had to keep waiting and waiting. But I was fortunate to be in my own practice because I could choose to just represent this family for free. I didn't have to get permission from anybody, like a boss going, there's this case I worked on when I was a law student and I'd really like to continue working on it. I'm doing it pro bono. And, I could have had a boss that just said, no, you can't do that. Sorry. Tell them to go find another lawyer. Right. But I had the ability to just continue working on this case, all the way up until the last hearing we had for them, which thankfully, sometimes you have a good ending to a story. And this one was, the case was so well documented that when it came time to have the hearing where the judge was going to decide on their case, the attorney for ICE, whose job is to basically show why this family should be deported,
Right.
actually said, this case shouldn't have been denied in the first place.
Oh wow.
He just, he was like, I've read everything in the file and
Oh wow.
there is nothing I can do. There is no argument I can make. And so we don't need to have this hearing.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
yep. And the judge granted them asylum right away.
So,
They didn't have to testify. They didn't have to relive their traumas,
Wow. That's
and now they're finally about to get their green cards.
oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you and them.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Well, let's end on a very positive note like that, And Michael, thank you so much for everything you said and all the stories. Always nice to sit and talk
Yeah.
to you.
Anytime.
Elias, thank you for
Thank you.
for
Alex.
bearing this,
Yeah, Michael,
But-
this was amazing.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you
Okay.
for having me.
and we'll see you next week.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael.
All right.